Dog won't stop barking at wall. Moments later, police break it open and freeze in shock. Dawn crept over Buckhead's pristine streets, casting long shadows across Atlanta's most affluent neighborhood. The early September air held summer's warmth, promising another sweltering Georgia day. Officer Sarah Collins adjusted her patrol car's air conditioning, glancing at her K9 partner Max in the rearview mirror. The Belgian Malinois sat alert in his specially designed compartment, amber eyes scanning the passing scenery with professional precision. The radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Unit K927. Possible missing person at 1542 Peachtree Valley Road. Husband reporting wife didn't return home last night. No signs of forced entry. Unit K97 responding 5 minutes out. Sarah flipped on her lights without hitting the sirens in the quiet neighborhood. Missing persons weren't typically K9 unit calls, but something about dispatch's tone suggested this wasn't routine. As they turned onto Peachtree Valley Road, Max's demeanor changed dramatically. His ears shot forward, body tensing in a way Sarah had learned to trust implicitly. 3 years as partners had taught her to read every subtle shift in his behavior. This wasn't his usual alert posture. This was something else entirely. The Parker residence stood out even among Buckhead's impressive homes, a sprawling colonial revival with perfectly manicured hedges and fresh white paint that gleamed in the morning sun. Too perfect, Sarah thought, as she pulled up to the curb. Max's usual disciplined silence broke into a low whine. David Parker emerged before Sarah could exit her vehicle. His crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks seemed at odds with his disheveled hair and the dark circles under his eyes. "Officer Collins, thank God you're here. My wife, Emily, she's missing. I've been calling everyone, but no one's seen her since yesterday." Max's unexpected growl caught Sarah off guard. In 3 years of service, she'd never heard him react to a civilian without cause. The dog's training was impeccable. He never broke protocol unless something was seriously wrong. "Mr. Parker, walk me through the last time you saw your wife." Sarah kept her voice professional, even as Max's behavior sent warning signals through her mind. 15 years on the force had taught her that domestic cases were often the most dangerous, and the first person to consider was always the spouse. "Last night, everything was normal. We had dinner together, watched some TV. When I woke up this morning, she was gone. Her car's still here, her phone's on the nightstand. Emily would never just leave, officer. She's not that kind of person." David's voice cracked with emotion, but something in his eyes remained cold, calculating. Max suddenly lunged forward, pulling Sarah toward the eastern wall of the house. His powerful muscles strained against the tactical harness, nose working the air frantically. Sarah had seen this intensity before, in collapsed buildings, during search and rescue operations, when lives hung in the balance. "Sir, would you mind if we took a look around?" Sarah maintained her casual tone, noting how David's fingers twitched slightly at the request. Of course, anything to help find Emily. He gestured toward the front door, but Max had other ideas. The dog moved with singular purpose along the side of the house, stopping at a specific section of the wall. There, he sat rigid, focused, and began to bark with an urgency Sarah had never witnessed. "He's been acting strange all morning," David offered, his casual tone betrayed by his clenched jaw. "Must be picking up on my stress." Sarah approached the wall, running her hand along its surface. The paint was fresh, slightly different in texture from the rest of the house. "Recent renovations? Just some repairs. Had some water damage last month." David's answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Max's barking intensified. His trained composure cracked with each bark, each one more desperate than the last. Sarah had worked enough cases to know that K9s didn't react this way to simple stress. Max was trying to tell her something, and in 3 years, he'd never been wrong. She keyed her radio, keeping her eyes fixed on David's increasingly nervous face. "Dispatch, Unit K97 requesting additional units at 1542 Peachtree Valley Road for a thorough property search." The change in David's expression was subtle, but unmistakable. Fear replaced concern. Anger eclipsed worry. Is that really necessary? I'm sure she'll turn up. Women get emotional sometimes. They need space. Max's barking drowned out his protests, echoing through the quiet street like an alarm. Sarah noticed neighbors beginning to peek through their curtains, drawn by the commotion. David's perfect facade started to crack. "Mr. Parker, I'm going to need you to step back from the house." Sarah's hand moved to her holster as David's agitation grew visible. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Sarah kept her eyes on David while radioing dispatch again. "Request immediate backup from Detective Division and CSI. Possible 207 in progress." The code for kidnapping hung in the air like a thundercloud. As additional units arrived, Sarah noticed something else about the wall. Subtle marks near the bottom, barely visible unless you were looking for them. Scratch marks, perhaps. She thought of the fresh paint, the water damage story, David's 2 perfect responses. "Max, good boy," she whispered, placing a steady hand on her partner's head. The dog's barking never ceased, each sound a desperate plea to be heard, to be believed. Sarah had learned long ago that when Max acted like this, lives hung in the balance. Detective Roberts' familiar sedan pulled up as David Parker was escorted away from the wall. Sarah met her colleague's eye with a grave expression. "Sir, we're going to need a search warrant. Max is never wrong, and he's telling us something's very wrong here." The morning sun now hung high over Buckhead, its warmth doing nothing to dispel the chill that had settled over the scene. Behind that freshly painted wall, Sarah knew, lay answers that would shatter this perfect suburban facade, and as Max's barking continued, steady and insistent, she silently prayed they weren't too late. The search warrant arrived within the hour, but to Sarah it felt like an eternity. Max hadn't moved from his position by the wall, his barking now reduced to an occasional whine that seemed to carry more urgency than his earlier outburst. The morning heat was building, and Sarah could see beads of sweat forming on David Parker's forehead as he stood between 2 uniformed officers. Detective Roberts approached Sarah, his weathered face grave. "Collins, what made you so sure about this? Missing persons cases usually don't warrant this kind of response." Sarah nodded toward Max. "In 3 years, he's never been wrong. Something's behind that wall, sir. And Mr. Parker's story doesn't add up." Robert studied the wall, his eyes narrowing at the fresh paint. "CSI's on their way. Let's do this by the book. We don't want any mistakes if this turns into what I think it is." The CSI team arrived with their equipment, including a thermal imaging camera. Sarah watched as they methodically scanned the wall, her heart pounding with each passing second. Max's ears perked up as one of the technicians paused, adjusting his equipment. "We've got something," the technician announced, his voice tight. "There's a heat signature behind this section. It's consistent with a human body." The next few minutes exploded into action. The SWAT team, already on standby, moved in with precision. David Parker lunged forward, his composed facade finally shattering. "You can't do this! You have no right!" 2 officers restrained him as he thrashed, his face contorted with rage. "She deserved it. She was going to leave me. I couldn't let her." His confession cut off abruptly as he realized what he'd revealed. Sarah felt a cold fury rise in her chest, but maintained her professional demeanor. Max's earlier anxiety had transformed into focused intensity, his training taking over as he watched the SWAT team prepare their equipment. The sound of the battering ram against the wall echoed through the quiet street. Neighbors had gathered at the police perimeter, their morning routines forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. The wall began to crack, revealing a crude doorway hidden behind the fresh paint and plaster. "Emily?" Sarah called out, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Atlanta Police Department, can you hear me?" A weak moan answered from within. Max surged forward, but Sarah held him back, letting the SWAT team secure the space first. The hidden room was barely 6 feet square, hastily constructed but terrifyingly efficient in its purpose. And there, huddled in the corner, was Emily Parker. She was alive but dehydrated, her clothes dirty and torn. Her eyes squinted against the sudden light, tears leaving tracks through the dust on her face. "He said no one would ever find me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Sarah helped the paramedics guide Emily out while Max stood guard, his eyes never leaving David Parker. The man had gone quiet now, all his rage replaced by a cold, empty stare. Sarah couldn't help but think of how many other women might have faced similar fates if their abusers had been more methodical, more patient in their cruelty. As Emily was loaded into the ambulance, Sarah knelt beside Max, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy," she murmured. "You saved her life." Max leaned into her touch, his earlier distress gone, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Detective Roberts approached, his notebook in hand. "The paramedics say she'll recover, dehydrated, bruised, but no life-threatening injuries. Parker's lawyer's already on the way, but with the confession and this," he gestured at the broken wall, "he's looking at serious time." Sarah nodded, watching as crime scene technicians photographed and documented every detail of the hidden room. "How long do you think he spent planning this?" "Building permits show he filed for renovation work 3 months ago. Neighbors remember contractors coming and going for weeks." Roberts shook his head. "The bastard took his time, made it look legitimate. If it wasn't for your partner here..." Max's ears twitched at the praise, but his attention was focused on something else. He moved suddenly toward Emily's abandoned flower garden, nose working the soil. Before Sarah could stop him, he had gently unearthed something, a cell phone buried beneath the mulch. "Well, I'll be damned," Roberts muttered, calling over a crime scene technician. "Looks like Mrs. Parker managed to hide some evidence before he caught her." Sarah watched as the phone was carefully bagged and tagged. Even now, Max was still building their case, still finding the pieces that would ensure justice. She thought about the careful planning that had gone into David Parker's crime, the renovations, the fresh paint, the perfect suburban facade, and how it had all unraveled because of a dog's unfailing instincts and loyalty. Later, as the crime scene tape went up and the street filled with news vans, Sarah sat in her patrol car writing her report. Max dozed in his compartment, exhausted but content. On her dashboard, the radio crackled with other calls, other emergencies, but her mind kept returning to that wall and what lay behind it. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Emily was stable, asking to thank the officer with the dog who had found her. Sarah smiled, reaching back to pat Max's head. In a world where evil often hid behind perfect facades and practiced lies, her partner's simple, honest instincts had proven more powerful than any human deception. As they finally pulled away from the scene, Sarah glanced in her rearview mirror at the Parker house, its broken wall now exposed to the world. "Ready for another call, partner?" she asked. Max's alert posture was all the answer she needed. Together they drove on, leaving behind one more suburban facade stripped bare, one more victim saved, one more truth brought to light. Sarah sat in her parked patrol car outside the hospital, finishing her report on the Parker case. Max lay in his compartment, still alert despite the long morning. Her mind drifted to their first meeting 3 years ago at the Atlanta Police Department's K9 training center. Back then, she couldn't have imagined how this dog would change her life. The memory was vivid. A crisp autumn morning, much like today, she had stood among other K9 handler candidates, nervous but determined. Sergeant Martinez, the lead trainer, had approached with a young Belgian Malinois straining at his leash. "This is Max," Martinez had said, his face unreadable. "2 other handlers have already given up on him. Too intense," they said, "too focused. Maybe that's exactly what you need, Collins." Sarah remembered studying the dog's amber eyes, seeing not defiance, but intelligence. Max had stared back, head tilted slightly, as if making his own assessment. When she knelt to his level, he hadn't rushed forward like most dogs would. Instead, he had maintained eye contact, waiting. "They don't understand you, do they, boy?" she had whispered. Max's ears had twitched at her words, and in that moment, something clicked between them. The first weeks of training had been grueling. Max's intensity matched Sarah's perfectionism. both of them pushing each other to their limits. While other handlers struggled to motivate their dogs, Sarah's challenge was channeling Max's almost supernatural focus. She smiled, remembering their first successful training exercise. They had been practicing building searches with a training officer hidden inside an abandoned warehouse. Other teams had searched methodically, but Max had done something unexpected. He'd caught a scent and led Sarah directly to a wall, sitting perfectly still, his attention fixed on a specific spot. The training officer hadn't been behind that wall. He'd been in another room entirely. But when they'd investigated, they'd found a child's backpack, forgotten there months ago when the building had been used for a different exercise. Max had ignored the obvious target to find something that felt wrong to him. Sergeant Martinez had been impressed. "Some dogs are trained to find specific things," he'd said. "But Max, he finds the truth. Never seen anything like it." Their first real case together had proved Martinez right. They'd been called to a domestic disturbance, nothing unusual. But Max had ignored the arguing couple and instead focused on a locked closet. Inside, they'd found the woman's teenage daughter, badly beaten and in need of medical attention. The girl had been hiding there for days, afraid to seek help. The radio crackled, pulling Sarah back to the present. The hospital update confirmed that Emily Parker was recovering well. She'd been lucky, dehydrated and bruised, but no permanent physical damage. The psychological scars would take longer to heal. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Roberts. "Parker's talking. Says he got the idea from a true crime show. Had been planning it for months. Without your partner's instincts, we might never have found her in time." Max whined softly, picking up on Sarah's emotional state. She reached back to scratch his ears, remembering another crucial moment in their training. They'd been practicing rescue scenarios when a real emergency interrupted them, a building collapse downtown. Despite not being certified yet, they'd been the closest unit. Sarah had hesitated, but Martinez had nodded. "Go, you're ready." They'd arrived to chaos, dust, debris, and desperate relatives searching for survivors. Max had worked tirelessly, ignoring the conventional search patterns to follow his instincts. He'd found 3 people that day, leading rescuers to exactly where they needed to dig. The commendation ceremony afterward had meant little to either of them. What mattered was what they'd learned. Together, they could do more than just follow procedures. They could find the truth others missed. Now, watching the hospital entrance where Emily Parker was recovering, Sarah thought about all the training scenarios and real-world cases that had led to this moment. Max had never been just a K-9 unit to her. He was a partner who shared her dedication to finding the truth, no matter where it was hidden. Her phone buzzed again, a message from Emily's nurse. "She's asking to meet the dog who saved her life." Sarah glanced at Max in the rearview mirror. He sat up straighter, somehow knowing this was about him. Ready to meet someone's special partner? Max's soft woof was all the answer she needed. As they walked toward the hospital entrance, Sarah reflected on how far they'd come from that first meeting. Every training day, every case, every small victory had built the trust that had saved Emily's life. A young officer stopped them in the lobby, eyes wide with recognition. "Officer Collins, that's him? The dog who found her behind the wall?" Sarah nodded, noting how Max maintained his professional demeanor despite the attention. Always focused, always ready. The young officer shook his head in amazement. "How did you know? What made you trust his instincts so completely?" Sarah watched Max, his attention already focused on the hallway leading to Emily's room, ready for whatever came next. "Because he's never been wrong," she said simply. "And he never will be." Together they headed down the hospital corridor, their footsteps in perfect sync. They had more work to do, more truths to uncover, more lives to save. But for now, they would remind one survivor that even in the darkest places, hope could find its way through the walls, especially with a determined K-9 officer leading the way. Emily Parker's hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching as Max approached the bed with uncharacteristic gentleness. The usually intense K9 officer moved slowly, carefully, his ears forward but relaxed. Emily's hand trembled as she reached out to touch his head. "He knew," she whispered, her voice still rough. "Somehow he knew I was there." Tears rolled down her cheeks as Max rested his chin on the edge of her bed. "I could hear him barking. It was the first hope I'd had since—" Her voice trailed off. Sarah moved closer, taking the chair beside the bed. "Can you tell us what happened, Emily? Anything you remember might help build the case against David." Emily's fingers twisted in Max's fur as she spoke. "He'd been different lately, controlling, checking my phone, following me to work. When I told him I was leaving," she shuddered. "He was so calm about it. That should have been my first warning." Detective Roberts appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Mrs. Parker, Officer Collins, we need to talk. We found something in your husband's computer." Sarah felt Max tense beside her before she even processed Robert's tone. The dog's instincts, as always, one step ahead of human perception. "He had blueprints," Roberts continued, opening a file on his tablet. "Detailed plans for hidden rooms, not just in your house, Emily, other locations too. And there were photographs, other women, missing persons cases from across 3 states. The monitor's beeping increased with Emily's heart rate. Max pressed closer to her, offering silent comfort as Sarah absorbed the implications. David Parker wasn't just an abusive husband. He was something far worse. "How many?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "We've identified 5 potential victims over the past decade. Different cities, different circumstances, but the same MO. He'd renovate properties, create these hidden spaces, and then—" Roberts glanced at Emily apologetically. "Show me the locations," Sarah said, standing. Max immediately moved to her side, sensing her shift from comforting presence to active investigator. The briefing room at the precinct was crowded an hour later. Maps and photographs covered every surface, each marking a location where David Parker had done renovation work, each potentially hiding another victim. The first disappeared in Memphis, 2014. Roberts pointed to a red pin on the map. Then Nashville, 2016. Birmingham, 2018. All young women, all in homes or buildings where Parker's construction company did work. Sarah studied the pattern, feeling Max's steady presence beside her. "He was practicing," she said quietly, "learning from each attempt, getting better at hiding them. And if your partner hadn't caught this one—" Roberts left the thought unfinished. Sarah's phone buzzed. A message from the Memphis PD. They'd found something at the first location. Her hand instinctively went to Max's head as she read the update. "They broke through a wall in the basement," she reported, her voice heavy. "Found remains. They're sending dental records, but the timeline matches their missing person case." The room fell silent, except for the soft rustle of papers and Max's steady breathing. Sarah thought about Emily Parker, alive in her hospital bed, and all the others who hadn't been as fortunate, each representing a failure of the system to connect the dots, to see the pattern. "We need to check every property," she said finally. "Every renovation, every building he touched. Max can help. He can find what we've missed." Roberts nodded slowly. "I'll make the calls. But Collins, this is bigger than us now. FBI's taking interest. They'll want to run their own investigation. Then they can follow behind Max," Sarah said firmly. "He found Emily when their profiles and patterns missed everything. He can do the same for the others." As if understanding the weight of the task ahead, Max sat straighter, his posture shifting from attentive to determined. Sarah had seen that look before, in their training days. The look that said no wall was too thick, no hiding place too clever. Back in the patrol car, Sarah reviewed the files again. Each victim's photo seemed to stare back at her, asking why it took so long to see the truth. Max whined softly from his compartment, picking up on her distress. "We'll find them, boy," she promised. "Every last one. No more hidden rooms, no more lost voices." Her radio crackled with a new assignment, another domestic call across town. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. The Parker case was expanding, demanding attention. But then she thought about Emily, about how routine calls could hide deadly secrets. "Unit K97 responding," she answered, starting the engine. Max sat up, alert and ready. Together, they pulled away from the precinct, carrying the weight of newfound knowledge. Every wall could hide a victim. Every routine call could be the next Emily Parker. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Atlanta's streets as they drove. In her rearview mirror, Sarah watched Max, his amber eyes scanning their surroundings with renewed intensity. They had started this journey thinking they were solving one crime, saving one life. Now they knew they were facing something far darker, but that's what partners did. They faced the darkness together, broke down walls together, and brought the truth to light. One case, one victim, one hidden room at a time. The warehouse stood abandoned on the outskirts of Memphis, its windows dark against the setting sun. Sarah watched Max as he circled the building's perimeter, his nose working the ground with practiced precision. This was the third location they'd checked today, following David Parker's trail of renovation projects across state lines. FBI agent Chen stood nearby, her skepticism barely concealed. "Officer Collins, I understand your K-9 unit's success with the Parker case, but we have a specialized team for this kind of..." Max's sudden bark cut through the air. Sarah recognized the tone immediately, the same urgent alert he'd given at Emily's wall. "He's found something," she announced, already moving toward her partner. The dog had stopped at a section of the warehouse's concrete foundation, pawing at the ground. Agent Chen spoke rapidly into her radio as Sarah knelt beside Max, running her hand along the surface. There, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for, a seam in the concrete that shouldn't exist. Within an hour, the warehouse was lit by portable floodlights, the rhythmic sound of concrete saws filling the air. Max stayed focused on the spot, his body tense. Sarah kept one hand on his harness, both for his comfort and her own. "Collins!" Agent Chen's voice carried over the noise. "Ground-penetrating radar confirms it. There's a space down there." The cutting stopped. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Max's whine drew her attention to a small hole the saws had created. The beam of her flashlight revealed what they'd all feared. A room, roughly 6 feet square, hidden beneath the warehouse floor. "Get the recovery team in here," Chen ordered, her earlier skepticism gone. "And Collins, your partner was right, again." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The hidden room yielded its grim secrets, personal effects, a woman's shoe, strands of hair, all preserved in the sealed chamber like a time capsule of horror. The victim's ID confirmed what they'd suspected. Karen Martinez, missing since 2013, Parker's first known victim. Back at the temporary command center, Sarah studied the timeline they'd constructed. Karen Martinez's disappearance marked the beginning, but the pattern that emerged was more disturbing than they'd imagined. Parker hadn't just been hiding victims, he'd been perfecting his technique. Each room was more sophisticated than the last, Agent Chen explained, pointing to architectural drawings. He learned from every attempt. The ventilation improved, the walls got thicker. By the time he built Emily's prison, he thought he'd perfected it, Sarah finished. Max sat alert beside her chair, his eyes fixed on the evidence board. But he didn't count on Max. Her phone buzzed with a message from Detective Roberts back in Atlanta. More properties had been identified, stretching back even further than they'd thought. Parker's construction company had done renovations across 5 states, not 3. "We need to check them all," Sarah said, looking at Chen. "Every single one." The agent nodded grimly. "Already coordinating with local authorities. But your partner, his accuracy rate is unprecedented. We'd like you both to consult on the searches." Max's ears perked up at the change in Chen's tone. Sarah smiled slightly, remembering their early training days. "He doesn't do this for recognition, Agent Chen. He does it because it's right. Like handler, like dog," Chen replied. "The behavioral team has a theory about Parker's next project, a property in Chattanooga. If we're right..." Sarah was already standing, Max moving smoothly to her side. "There might be another victim, someone still alive." The drive to Chattanooga took 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity. Sarah kept glancing at Max in the rearview mirror, drawing strength from his steady presence. They'd started this journey looking for one missing woman. Now they were unraveling a decade of carefully hidden crimes. The target location was a recently renovated office building, its modern glass facade reflecting the night sky. Max's behavior changed the moment they stepped inside. His training kept him controlled, but Sarah knew that posture. He'd caught something. Floor by floor, they cleared the building. Max moved with purpose, leading them to the basement level. The forensics team followed, their equipment casting strange shadows on the concrete walls. Then Max stopped. His bark echoed through the empty space, bouncing off the walls like an accusation. Sarah approached the spot he indicated, a storage room, supposedly unused. "Get the thermal cameras," Chen ordered, "and someone find me the building plans, original and renovation." The next 30 minutes were tense as they compared blueprints. The storage room's dimensions didn't match. There was space unaccounted for, space hidden behind a false wall. When they finally broke through, they found her. Jessica Chen, no relation to the agent, reported missing 2 weeks ago. Alive, barely conscious, but alive. As the medics worked, Sarah knelt beside Max. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You found her. You found them all." Later, watching the sunrise from the hospital parking lot, Sarah received the final count from Agent Chen. 7 survivors discovered, including Emily and Jessica. 4 sets of remains recovered, and evidence suggesting there might be more locations yet to check. Max dozed in his compartment, exhausted but content. They'd been working for 20 hours straight, following the dark trail Parker had left across the south. Each hidden room they'd found was like a chapter in a horror story, but they'd brought that story into the light. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Roberts. "Parker's talking, full confession, says he never thought anyone would find them. Definitely never counted on a dog who could smell the truth." She reached back to scratch Max's ears, remembering all the times people had doubted his instincts, all the times they'd called him too intense, too focused. Now, those same qualities had saved lives, uncovered crimes, and brought justice to victims long forgotten. The radio crackled with a new assignment, but for once, Sarah didn't immediately respond. She and Max had earned their rest. Tomorrow would bring more walls to break down, more truths to uncover. But for now, they could breathe, knowing they'd brought light to the darkest of places. 1 year later, the Atlanta Police Department's ceremony hall was packed to capacity. Sarah stood at attention, Max sitting perfectly still beside her, both of them the picture of professional composure. On the podium, Police Chief Harrison addressed the crowd, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "Today, we honor not just extraordinary service, but a partnership that redefined what's possible in modern law enforcement. Officer Sarah Collins and K9 Officer Max didn't just solve one case. They uncovered one of the most extensive serial kidnapping operations in Southern history." In the front row, Emily Parker sat among other survivors, her hand clasped with Jessica Chen's. Both women had become advocates for domestic violence awareness, their story inspiring others to speak out. Behind them, FBI agent Chen nodded approvingly, remembering how her initial skepticism had transformed into unwavering support. Through their efforts, Harrison continued, 11 victims were found alive, 7 cold cases were solved, and countless future crimes were prevented. But perhaps most importantly, they reminded us that sometimes the truth isn't found in databases or profiles, but in trusting our partners, even when, especially when, that partner has 4 legs. Sarah felt Max shift slightly beside her, his attention drawn to movement at the back of the hall. A therapy dog had entered with its handler, headed for a support group session in another room. Even now, Max's instincts were always working, always aware. The ceremony continued with the presentation of medals, the K9 Distinguished Service Medal for Max, the Medal of Valor for Sarah. But the real reward had come earlier that morning, when they'd received word of David Parker's sentencing, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. After the ceremony, Emily approached them, kneeling to Max's level. "I never got to properly thank you," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. "Both of you. You didn't just save my life. You saved me from believing I was alone." Sarah watched as Max gently leaned into Emily's touch, his usual intensity softened by understanding. This was what made him special, not just his ability to find hidden rooms, but his capacity to sense exactly what each survivor needed. "The support group is growing," Emily continued, standing. "Women are coming forward, recognizing the signs earlier. Your case, it opened a lot of eyes." Detective Roberts joined them, tablet in hand. "Speaking of opening eyes, you'll want to see this. The FBI's new training program, based on your methods, just graduated its first class. They're calling it the Max Protocol, teaching handlers to trust their canine partner's instincts beyond traditional parameters." Sarah smiled, remembering all the times Max's behavior had seemed inexplicable until the truth was revealed. "He always knew," she said. "We just had to learn to listen." The afternoon found them back on patrol, driving through familiar Atlanta streets. The city had changed in subtle ways since the Parker case. New laws had been passed, improving oversight of construction permits. Support services had received increased funding. Small changes perhaps, but meaningful ones. Max's sudden alertness drew Sarah's attention to a woman hurrying down the street, frequently glancing over her shoulder. Without hesitation, Sarah pulled over. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" The woman started to nod, then saw Max in the back of the patrol car. Something in his steady gaze made her pause. I don't know," she admitted. "My boyfriend, he's been..." An hour later, they'd connected her with Emily's support group and filed a protective order. Another potential tragedy prevented, another life potentially saved. All because Max had noticed something wrong in a seemingly ordinary moment. Back at the precinct, Sarah reviewed their day's reports while Max dozed nearby. A photo on her desk showed the entire team from the Parker investigation. FBI agents, local police, forensics experts, and in the center, a Belgian Malinois with alert amber eyes. Her phone buzzed with a message from Agent Chen. "2 more departments implementing the Max Protocol. Your partner's changing the game, Collins." Sarah reached down to scratch Max's ears, rousing him from his nap. "Ready to head home, partner?" Max stood, shaking himself alert. As they walked to the car, several rookie officers nodded respectfully. The legend of the dog who could smell the truth had spread far beyond Atlanta, inspiring a new generation of canine handlers to trust their partner's instincts. The setting sun painted the city in shades of gold as they drove home. Sarah thought about all the lives that had been changed in the past year, the survivors finding their voices, the policies being reformed, the new protocols being implemented. All because one dog had refused to ignore what his instincts told him about a seemingly ordinary wall. At a red light, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Max sat alert as always, watching the world with unwavering attention. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new walls to break down. But together, they would face them all, armed with the most powerful tools in law enforcement: trust, instinct, and the unshakable bond between handler and canine. The light turned green, and they moved forward into the gathering dusk. Behind them, the city pulsed with countless stories yet to be uncovered. But wherever the truth lay hidden, they would find it. Because that's what partners did. They kept searching, kept believing, kept fighting for justice. One case at a time, one victim at a time, one truth at a time.